All right, so starting with question 22, our prompt is further evidence bearing on Jameson's activities must have come to light. Sounds like our conclusion. On the basis of previously available evidence alone, it would have been impossible to prove that Jameson was a party to the fraud, and Jameson's active involvement in the fraud has now been definitively established. Our two premises. The question is, the pattern of reasoning exhibited in the argument above most closely parallels that exhibited in which of the following? So far we have our conclusion and our premises. And I went ahead and translated our premise number 1 into a conditional statement. So if we're going on previous evidence alone, then we cannot prove that Jameson was party to the fraud. The contrapositive of that, well, we can say prove Jameson was party to the fraud. The reason that we want to start thinking about the contrapositive is that our second premise is Jameson's active involvement has been established. And so in other words, we have been able to prove that Jameson was party to the crime. And so if we start with that, that would give us the contrapositive of the statement. So if we do prove that Jameson was party, then that means that we are not going based on previous evidence alone. And so this premise paired with premise 2, satisfying this condition, gives us our conclusion. We're not going on previous evidence alone. Further evidence must have come to light. So that's how our prompt, that's kind of the pattern of reasoning in our prompt. So looking at choice A, our conclusion, we have Smith must not have purchased his house within the last year. That's what we have as our conclusion. And then we have two premises. He is listed as the owner of that house on the old list of property owners. He's on the old list. And anyone on the old list could not have purchased his or her property in the last year. So if we turn this into a conditional statement, we have anyone on the old list. If anyone is on the old list, then they did not purchase their property last year. So now, if we're looking at our premises, we have a premise that satisfies the condition of the statement. Smith is on the old list, and so that means he didn't purchase his property last year. So it's a valid statement, but it doesn't require grabbing the contrapositive. It doesn't require negating the second part of the statement. And so we can say that that argument does not follow the same pattern of reasoning as our prompt. All right, moving on to B, we have Turner must not have taken her usual train to Nantes today. So T did not take her usual train is our conclusion. Had she done so, she could not have been at Nantes until this afternoon, but she was seen having coffee in Nantes at 11 this morning. So our first premise, if she had taken her usual train, she wouldn't have been in Nantes until the afternoon. So I did Nantes in the morning, not. And premise 2, she was seen in Nantes in the morning. So if we take the contrapositive, we have Nantes in the morning, then not usual train. And that's our conclusion. So that does follow the same pattern of reasoning as our prompt. We have a premise, we negate the second part of that conditional, we take the contrapositive, and that leaves us with the conclusion, and we've done the same over here. All right, so going through the rest of our answers just to disprove them, we have C. Norris must have lied when she said that she had not authorized the investigation. So our conclusion is that Norris lied about the authorization. There is no doubt that she did authorize it, and authorizing an investigation is not something anyone is likely to have forgotten. So this disproves two possibilities that are alternatives to her lying. So for one, we know that she did it, and for two, it couldn't be that she did it and then forgot, so she's definitely lying. It's an argument, but it doesn't necessarily follow the same pattern of reasoning as our prompt. All right, answer D, we have Wow must have known that last night's class was canceled. Wow knew class was canceled is our conclusion. Our premises are that he was in the library yesterday. Wow was in the library yesterday, and it would have been impossible for anyone in the library not to have seen the cancellation notices. So basically if you were in the library, then it would have been impossible, then you would have not seen the cancellation notices. So here, similar to answer choice A, we have our premise, and we have another premise that satisfies the condition, and so the conclusion follows. I guess we could say that there's even something missing where somebody who saw the cancellation notices had to have known that class was canceled, but if we just assume that, then that leads to our conclusion, but there's no negating the condition of the contrapositive here. And our last answer choice, Laforte must have deeply resented being passed over for promotion. Conclusion, he maintains otherwise, but only someone who felt badly treated would have made the kind of remark Laforte made at yesterday's meeting. So we have only somebody who felt badly treated would have made the remark, and then implied within that is that he made the remark. And so again, it's one of our premises satisfying the condition of the other premise. And we do kind of have to make the assumption that feeling badly treated means that he resented being passed over. So I actually think this one's kind of easier to discard as an answer choice, because there's even almost like a missing premise of feeling badly treated, or feeling deeply resented means feeling badly treated. But even if we ignore that, there's not the same pattern of negating the condition of the contrapositive. Moving on to our second question, we have only a very small percentage of people from the service professions ever become board members of the 600 largest North American corporations. This shows that people from the service professions are underrepresented in the most important corporate boardrooms in America. So we have our conclusion. People in the service professions are underrepresented in the most important boardrooms in North America. And our premise is only a small percentage of people in the service professions ever become board members of the 600 largest North American corporations. So I think a visual really helps here. Oh, and the question being, which one of the following points out a flaw committed in the argument? So we're looking for a flaw. I think it helps even before we start thinking about the flaws to visualize what this premise is saying. So let's say we have people in the service professions is our group. This is people in service professions. It's saying only a small percentage of those people become board members. So we can say that this small percentage become board members of the 600 largest corporations. At this point, we have no numbers. We don't know what the size of this group is or what the size of this group is. So we can start looking at some of the questions. And then, and looking at the conclusion quickly and trying to visualize it in a similar way, underrepresented in the most important corporate boardrooms in North America. So we're saying that if these are the most important corporate boardrooms, this group is underrepresented. So we have A. So answer A is 600 is too small a sample on which to base so sweeping a conclusion about the representation of people from the service professions. We have 600, but I think the important thing here is that we're calling the 600 largest corporations and basically assuming that that makes them some of the most important boardrooms in North America. And so we're not trying to make a conclusion about representation of people from the service professions in general, just their representation in the most important corporate boardrooms in America, of which we've looked at 600. So that doesn't really feel like too small a sample to me. Answer choice B, we have the percentage of people from the service professions who serve on the boards of the 600 largest North American corporations reveals little about the percentage of the members of those boards who are from the service professions. So this is the key of our visual. So let's put some numbers behind this to help visualize it. Let's say that service professionals, we have 10,000, and let's say that our small percentage is 500. If that 500 is taken into this 600 most largest corporations in America, suddenly this 500 feels really big, because 500 out of 600, that is not an underrepresentation. So since we don't know what this number is, in relation to the 600, we can actually decide whether this is an underrepresentation or not. So that is where B is correct. Answer choice C, we have it is a mistake to take the 600 largest North American corporations to be typical of corporate boardrooms generally. The reason that this one is not correct is that we're not saying the 600 largest North American corporations are corporate boardrooms generally. We're only saying that they could be called the most important corporate boardrooms in North America. That's also a kind of an underlying or implied assumption that needs to be made, because there's no premise that really explicitly says the 600 largest corporations are also the most important. But in relation to the answer choice, we're not saying that they are typical of corporate boardrooms generally. In answer choice D, we have it is irrelevant to smaller corporations whether the largest corporations in North America would agree to have significant numbers of workers from the service professions on the boards of the largest corporations. So I think this one's a little tricky because it brings in smaller and kind of gets you thinking, well, if smaller ones could be important, we could say that there are people from the service professions on the boards of smaller corporations. We don't really know that, but I think that's bringing in too much outside information and really just trying to confuse us, because regardless, B still stands that we really can't decide if there's an underrepresentation in the largest and most important. So whether the smaller, and also like whether the smaller corporations have significant numbers of workers on their boards or not isn't really part of or relevant to the prompt unless we can establish that those smaller corporations make up a lot of the most important corporate boardrooms in North America. And finally, answer choice E, the presence of people from the service professions on a corporate board does not necessarily imply that the corporation will be more socially responsible than it has been in the past. This one I think is the easiest to throw out by process of evaluation. There's no mention of social responsibility, whether in the past or the future, and no mention of service professionals being on a board having anything to do with social responsibility.